So we're gonna, since it's appropriate that Shavuos is coming about Matzoi Shabbos, Saturday night, Sunday, and Monday, and we're gonna connect it to an amazing piece of Talmud that talks about a conversation that Moshe has with the angels, and from that discussion, we're going to try to discover to what extent does our Torah study have to have the proper intentions. So if I'm opening up a book of the Torah, can I learn simply for the intellectual knowledge, stimulation? Can it all be theoretical? Certainly when you pick up an exercise book, there's no guarantee you're going to exercise, but you may have the knowledge. So does it matter what your intentions are? You get on a Zoom class for a Torah weekly class, do you have to question your intentions? Rabbi, I'm not really interested. Can you just really come to a class? Or is it sacrilegious if you have no intention of ever following any of the of what it's the religious lessons, the moral lessons that one is going to learn? Is there any value to study Torah without any application? Is it, in fact, to take it to the extreme, is it better to learn for all the wrong reasons than not to learn at all? And we're going to find that throughout our writings, that there are many, many quotes that really could take us either way. Once we delve into it a little bit more, we'll find out exactly, what do these real sayings of our sages really mean. But I first want to draw your attention to an amazing piece of Talmud, and it's from the Tractate of Shabbos, because Shabbos, on page 88 of Tractate Shabbat, it describes the whole scene of Moses going up to Mount Sinai prior to receiving the Torah, together with all the Jewish nation, the 10 Commandments, and so on. What does it tell us? It tells us that Moshe, when he came up on high, and God said, I'm going to give you and the Jewish nation the Torah, it says that the ministering angels, the malachim, the angels, said, whoa, 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 whoa. What's going on? You're giving the Torah to the Jewish people? Now, don't forget, we have an earlier Rashi and Medrash that says, what preceded what? Did the Torah precede the world, or did the world precede the Torah? So we know it says, Istakal Kadosh Baruch Hu be'araisa bara'alma. God looked into the Torah and created the world. The Torah was the blueprint for the world. So of course the blueprints exist before one builds the home. So Torah existed before. Now I know, again, this is a larger subject. What does it mean the Torah existed before? I mean, you have the story of Abraham, you have the story of Isaac. That couldn't have existed before. But there were principles of the Torah. So for instance, if I want to build a home that feels warm and safe, well, if that's my principle, then I got to probably build a home, depending if it's in Montreal, Canada, or Saskatchewan, you probably got to build it with a heater. If you want it to be safe, you probably got to put a couple of locks and windows, depending where you live. So depending on what you want to build, it's going to be built based upon what your original desire was. The Torah is God's desire written in a book form, not necessarily stories. The stories that occurred are part and parcel, and they're part of the tapestry that describe God's ultimate will. So the angels say to God, you had the Torah way before anything. It was already in heaven. It belongs to us. Why do you want to give it to people? They're nudniks. They're not going to listen. We're like ministering angels. We're not going to get anything wrong. I promise you. So, and that's what the Talmud says. The angels say, you have a hidden treasure for 974 generations. And now you want to give it to someone of flesh and blood? So what does God do? He tells Moshe Rabbeinu, listen, they got a complaint. Why don't you give them an answer? So Moses, instead of referring back to God, takes on the challenge. And what does he say to God? Tell me, Master of the universe, what does it say in your Torah? Tell me. I took you out of Egypt. The angels were in Egypt. Now, again, all of these retorts are not going to make much sense to you, because obviously the angels weren't talking about keeping a Torah that had a history to it. So again, this is an amazing discussion, but we're going to sort of focus on one part. Moshe says to God, you shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. Really? Do you have jealousy? Do you have an evil inclination? I mean, none of the Torah, none of its commandments even are applicable to you. None of it makes any sense. You can't honor parents. You don't have parents. So what part of Torah do you want? Now, again, like I'm telling you, this is a big discussion. Again, I want to hone in on one thing. But actually, the angels in this part of the Talmud, in Shabbat 88, the angels actually say to God, listen, we agree with your plan. Give it to the people. Now, what was Moshe's rationale? What actually was he trying to tell the angels? Now, before we answer that, I have another question for you. It's not my question, actually. It's from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says, you're talking about God's wisdom. Could I ask you a question? Do you mean to tell me that if the Torah preceded the world, what you're telling me is that all the loftiest worlds, all the supernal beings, even angels, are insignificant compared to Torah? And you want to tell me, Moshe, that your response to the angels was that the entire reason that the Torah is being given to us is because you don't have jealousy, you don't have an evil inclination. You mean that Moshe basically gave the reason that we got the Torah because he had to downsize Torah to basically being a practical tool to counterbalance our evil inclination? Is that what it is? The entire Torah is being basically given to us because it's supposed to help us with our human failings? Now, of course, you might say, yes, that's what Torah is about, to help us become the best that we can. But let me ask you something. If we stopped gossiping and we stopped having an evil inclination, would that render the Torah useless? Does that make sense? So what was it that Moshe was trying to tell God and the angels? What really is the purpose of the Torah? So much so, and what is the purpose of the Torah? That it could only be given to us, not to the angels. What is it about the Torah that it only makes sense to give it to us, and yet we don't want to minimize it or limit it to simply saying, by the way, it's an amazing self-help book, and angels don't need self-help books. Really? Is that what it's about? So let's go back to this idea of studying Torah for the right intentions. So we have the story of the angels and Moshe. We have his response. We find the response a little bit iffy. Now let's go back to our original question. Can you study Torah without the proper intentions? Is there any sources that we have that suggest that if you do that, it's really not a healthy endeavor? Or yes, let's see what some of our sources have to offer. So I'm going to go back again to the Talmud, this time to the tractate of Psachim of Pesach. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, A person should always engage in Torah and mitzvahs, even with ulterior motives. Now, this is a very famous quote. It's mitay shalai lishma balishma. He says, why? Because if you learn Torah with ulterior motives, ultimately it will lead you to learn Torah for the proper intentions. That seems to give you carte blanche. Beautiful. Okay. So therefore, even if you learn Torah for not the right reasons, you'll still be rewarded. It's still considered a good thing to do. Now, Maimonides, interestingly enough, uses this as a premise for the whole idea of education. When you teach children at a very young, tender age, you're going to teach children and reward them and entice them to learn Torah. Why are we doing that? Because we cannot afford to wait until they can, on their own, rationally and logically appreciate the grandeur of Torah and how much it's makes sense and how much it's beneficial and so on and so forth. In the words of the Rambam of Maimonides, when the child matures and develops, they will eventually realize that what was prompting them to learn before was obviously the wrong things. Today, it's certainly unappealing. And depending on their age, they're going to need another incentive. But in general, while imperfect, nonetheless, a person should always engage in Torah and mitzvahs, not for its own sake, because eventually you'll do it for the right reasons. As a child grows and becomes a mature adult, that's how it works. What does it say in Ethics of Our Fathers? Chanoch l'nar al pi darko. Educate a child based upon their mannerisms, their ways. On the other hand, I'm not going to say that there aren't any sources at all that tell us that that's a bad way of going about it. Going back to the first tractate of the entire Talmud, Talmud Brachos, it says the beginning of wisdom is fear of God, and one should do the learn and the mitzvot for the deed themselves, and one who does them not for their own sake, it would have been preferable for him to not have been created. Noach lo shalei nivra would have been better if he would not have been created. That's an extreme remark. Let's take it a step further. Whoever engages, this is from Rabbi Banoah, in Torah study altruistically, the Torah becomes an elixir of life. Sam is like a potion. Sam hachayim, an elixir of life. But what happens if you engage in Torah study for an ulterior motive? Oy vey, nasalei sam hamavis. It becomes an elixir of death for them. On the one hand, we're telling you to learn shalei lishma, not for the sake of Torah, because ultimately it will lead for the sake of Torah. On the other hand, you're telling me that it could possibly be an elixir of death. So which one is it? So obviously there are plenty of rabbis that try to reconcile the extremes of these statements. One level is that a person is studying for attention, recognition, self-benefit, but God forbid there can be, as history has proven, that people learn for the sake of ridicule, for the sake of hoping to cool off other people from Torah study. And so if you want it for your own ulterior motives, okay, so that's how you feel right now. Eventually you'll come right. But if you're learning Torah because you have an agenda, that's going to be bad news. In fact, in today's day and age, when some people will come over to a rabbi and say to the rabbi, I'm an apikores, I'm a heretic. And we laugh, you're not a heretic. You're ignorant. You're not a heretic. Why? Because in Europe, there was the apikoros, there was the heretic. Who was the heretic? The guy that the rabbi himself would be afraid of. He was someone who knew Torah. He knew Talmud. He was brilliant. And in spite of all that, he said, he would ridicule the rabbi. This is what you guys are doing. You understand this? You're ignorant. That's why you're doing it. So they actually used Torah study. What happened with all, you talk about Nachmanides, when he had the great debate. Who were having the debates with the rabbis between Christianity and Judaism? It was converted monks, converted Jews who became monks. They used all their Torah study to bring down Judaism for the sake of Christianity. Whether they meant even that sincerely or whether they just chose a better side, who knows? But in the meantime, plenty of people learned in order to bring because they had nefarious schemes to it. So if it becomes for an ulterior motive, a negative ulterior motive, it becomes an elixir of death, Samamovis, because he has the intention to use all his Torah study to ridicule others. That's what Tosfos says in a commentary, famous commentary of the French era of scholars of the 12th and 13th centuries. In the Talmud, responding to the seeming contradiction between ulterior motives, learn, or ulterior motives, don't learn. Now, so in short, it really depends on our motivations. If you're learning for naturally selfish reasons, no problem, go for it. But if you have a scheme to negatively affect others, better you shouldn't learn. It won't be good for you, and it won't be good for anyone else. Now, there is an interesting approach that actually learning without any intent of applying it is also bad. Meaning that ultimately, and this we find also on a commentary in Talmud, and I'm going to read it. It says, someone who engages in Torah study with no plans to implement what they study. So we're not talking about some nefarious scheme. Simply you're learning and have no plans to ever engage. In fact, how so? Why is that bad? So an interesting take is, ignorance is bliss. It's one thing if you sin, if you don't know it's a sin. Can you imagine if you end up learning it and you still don't have any intention of doing it? Now you're sinning. It's no longer an advertent sin. It's not a shegeg. It's not unintentional. It's intentional. Now you know. I once had a very cute thing. It was about doing something on Shabbos, which clearly is not 100% prohibited. But in Jewish law, we have sometimes where it's not prohibited, avol einan meirin came. But if somebody's going to ask you, there's a far better way of doing it, and you should not tell the person to do it. So after marriage, there's a yeshiva for married people called Kollel. So there was a head of the Kollel, his name was Rabbi Heller. So somebody came to him and asked him a question about this particular thing on Shabbos. And Rabbi Heller said, you know what, go look it up yourself. So he said, Rabbi, with all due respect, if I wanted to look it up, I'm asking you because you're the rabbi, I want a quick answer. He says, no, I suggest you look it up. He said, I'm asking you. He says, you know what? If you're asking me, the answer is no. Now go look it up. When he went to look it up, he realized that if he would have looked it up, he would have found out that it's permissible. Now that I'm asking, the answer is no. So in the reverses, sometimes if you don't know, it's better. You don't know, you don't know. But if you know, now it's an advertent sin. In fact, if you don't know it's a sin, you can't even be held accountable. So that's one way of suggesting that that learning may not be beneficial. So now you have in the middle of this whole discussion, you have with certainty statements in the Talmud that says clearly, learn for not the right reasons, even for ulterior motives. Don't worry. One day you'll come to it. You'll come to it. The other says, listen, if you have really bad intentions, then stay away. We even have the suggestion that if you never plan to engage, then maybe, I don't know, maybe you shouldn't. Ignorance is bliss. But at the end of the day, let's go back to the famous statement, almost like the carte blanche statement, that if you learn not for the right intentions, eventually you'll come right. So, you know, all of you, maybe some of the elderly on this chat, remember the days that they tell us, it became illegal afterwards, that when you went into a movie theater, unknown to you, they would put in the middle of the movie like messaging. Now the brain actually doesn't pick it up. You only pick it up subliminally. I remember I went once to the Kellogg business school. They wanted to try a pilot program for rabbis and presidents. And one of their exercises was actually, and I didn't see it, some picked it up. I guess it was an exercise of how in tuned and observant you are, that in the middle of a basketball game, a guy ran across the court in a ape suit. And he asked most of us, did you see the guy run across the court with an ape suit? Most of us said no. I think one or two people saw it. He slowed down the movie, and you clearly see a guy running across the court with an ape suit. So they say that in the movie theaters, they used to put advertising, I don't know whether Coke or toothpaste or whatever it was, in, and you'd walk out, you would never even know that there was a subliminal commercial in the movie. But subliminally, the messaging was there. By the way, you see this work amazingly with people who tell you, you know, pick a number, pick a this, pick a that, and so on and so forth. And they show you how they did it. Because when they picked you up from the hotel into the office that they brought you to, they set up that where the taxi or the car would stop, you'd see certain things. Unknown to you, they were able to predict already beforehand what you were going to pick based upon their certainty that there was subliminal messaging all the way that you came to their office. If there's such a thing called subliminal messaging, is there such a thing called subliminal transformation? So let's say you come to a class on a Sunday morning. You come to our Talmud class Sunday morning because you want the bagels. Now, don't get excited because I actually don't serve bagels in the Sunday morning class. But let's say there was bagels. Maybe I should take them. Maybe I should. You know, Jews like food. And you decide you're going to come for the bagels. Should you come to learn if you're coming for all the wrong reasons? And the answer is yes. Why? The first Chabad Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, writes in his Code of Jewish Law, the laws of Talmud Torah, of learning Torah. He writes that a person should always engage in Torah mitzvahs, even with ulterior motives, because eventually, quoting from the Talmud, it will lead you to its intended purpose. But why? And the Alter Rebbe adds this sentence. He says, eventually the light of Torah will bring them back to the righteous path. He says, of course you should learn Torah, because Torah has light. Torah has power. No matter why you would study Torah, keep learning Torah. even if it's for the bagels, even if it's for the wrong reasons. Why? Because eventually the Torah itself will lead you down righteous paths. So the Alter Rebbe says that based upon this, even when the Talmud is using such harsh language, elixir of death, elixirs of death can become elixirs of life. It can be transformed. If God forbid somebody would stop studying at all, then you would become a victim of the whims of your natural inclinations or even evil inclination. So it remains true that if one studies with an agenda, like we said before, 100%, you can't escape that. That's not good. But ultimately, even with an agenda, it's possible that Torah itself has the potential that you become altruistic and learn it for the right reasons. So if we go back to our original question, the encounter that Moshe has with the angels, and we asked this following question. We said, really, Moshe? Your counterattack to the angels, you don't have parents, you don't have an evil inclination, you don't have jealousy, you have no need to work. That's why you'll never be tempted to work on Shabbos. Really? Are you suggesting that to you the Torah is only an antidote to human failure, to human failings? That was our question. And what is the answer? The answer is yes. Not that I'm diminishing Torah to that. By telling you that Torah does that, you're actually being exposed to what Torah really is. Let me explain. You see, the source of transformation, the ability to transform oneself, comes at the highest levels of godliness. And I'll prove it to you, actually. Anything that you see that transforms a seed to a flower, a seed to, it's all part of the natural makeup of creation. All the supernal beings, all the supernal worlds follow a path that was naturally ingrained in them from the time that they were created. Angels only grow relative to a certain pattern that's been ingrained in them. Yes, angels, when we say angel, by the way, we do refer to angels as emdim, stationary. But in truth, Jewish mysticism tells us they're not stationary, because since they're intellectual beings, they also have growth. But they only have growth relative to where they were before. Almost like you'll see the gradual transformation of everything else in nature that's been ingrained to follow a particular pattern. Angels follow a particular pattern of very relative growth. Transformation doesn't exist anywhere in the human experience, anywhere in the universal experience except for the human being. And the only reason is because God decided to give the human being that gift of transformation. And how did he give us this power of transformation? And by the way, Why does God have that ability of transformation? Because he's not dependent on any entity. He can change anything that he wants. So even in the words of Chassidut, even the loftiest of godly revelations are restricted by their definitions of light and revelation. It is only God's essence, the ultimate simplicity, beyond any definition and unrelated to all opposition, that has the capacity to alter and transform evil to good. God decided, not to angels, not to anything else, God decided to share this true essential power of transformation simply to us, lowly human beings. Why? Because we need it. It's the human being that has the ability to fall so low. You need the ability not to just grow gradually. You need to be able to turn things around quickly. You need to, despite our failings and limitations, we need to experience this transformative power that God gave us. Now, Jews have something a little extra. Why? That's because we also are expected to do a little bit more. We have the Torah. And God put within his Torah this power of taking an evil inclination and making it work only for godly purposes, taking all negativity and changing it to positivity. And guess what? Like I mentioned, there's no need for this power in heaven, because you know what? And this is what Moshe tells the angels. You don't have jealousy. You don't have an evil inclination. You don't need Torah. It's not like we understand the Talmud. How could God give you the Torah? You don't have a father and mother. You can't keep the mitzvah. It's not about being nitty and saying, you don't have this, you don't get the Torah. No, you don't need the Torah. The Torah wasn't meant for you. It's specifically because we have failings and deficiencies that we need to have the Torah. So, so it's actually turns it completely around. We would say until now, because we have these terrible failings, that's why we need the Torah. In spite of our failings, we got our Torah to be able to transform it. And that's the essential quality of the Torah. I want to read you something. The essence of Torah is expressed specifically in the fact that it serves as an antidote to the evil inclination. Why? Because the only way that you can counter the evil inclination and transform it into something good flows exclusively from God's essence, which is found in the Torah. So it's not just an antidote to your evil inclination. When Moshe tells the angels, we need an antidote to our evil inclination, it's actually telling us that the Torah is the antidote, because Torah has transformative powers. So, can you study without the proper intention? Can you study without any intention of putting it into practice? Is it hypocritical? Is it wrong to engage in Torah if it's the furthest thing from your mind to put it into any practice? And the answer is no problem. Because regardless of your motives, unknown to you, you cannot learn Torah unless it's for evil reasons. And even then, it could still have, it could still help. But for the most part, when something will happen to you when you learn Torah, even subliminally, even though you don't know it, you are raised to a higher level, even without realizing it. And that's very interesting. I sometimes say that you can get a person who engages in Torah study, and let's say you call him a meat and potatoes guy. He understands meat, he understands potatoes, something a little abstract. Then all of a sudden, he starts engaging and learning. You see a transformation. Something happens to them. They become refined. So never question your reasons for coming to a learning class. Doesn't matter if you're coming for the bagels. It doesn't matter if you're coming for the company. Doesn't matter if you're coming, whatever it is. Learn, 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 and learn. Because if you learn for not the proper intentions, ultimately, ba lishma, it will become an elixir of life. You will end up learning for all the right intentions.